What is up, everyone, and welcome to episode 17. We're getting up there in these episodes of the Trainer Scoop, a podcast dedicated to helping individuals passionate about fitness improve in life and lifting. Today, I have an old-time friend and someone that I'm very excited to bring to the podcast, Robbie Gregg. Robbie, say what's up to everybody.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on today. I was thinking back kind of like how I know you always like to reflect on how I meet my guests. But so Robbie was a senior when I was a freshman at Ohio State in our fraternity. So we kind of had that connection. I remember several memories with you. The one time when you dusted my ass at the 5K that Wyatt Hanlon put on. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh,
But
I do. I still have that medal.
Did you win?
I got second, I think.
Okay.
I think there was someone that like smoked me. I think I beat Austin Stewart or he beat me. It was one of those two, but I got a second place medal from that. That's like on my little trophy like
Right.
shelf.
I remember thinking like, I'm just going to try to keep up with Robbie. And we got maybe like more than a mile in. I was like, never mind. This is awful. This is why I don't run anymore.
Yeah, no, and I haven't run much since then. That was one of those things, like that was a spur of the moment thing. And so I think the day before I went out and ran like 3 miles, which was also a mistake. So I was like already tired going into this 5K, and I was just like, oh, this is rough.
That's really funny. We also went to the Indy 500 back when that was still a people thing in 2019.
Yeah.
That was a blast.
Yeah.
So definitely.
It's crazy to think that was only a year ago.
I know, it seems
forever.
like a lifetime ago at this point.
Yeah.
We haven't been able to have many fun things lately, but I'm excited for this podcast, and hopefully it'll be fun for the audience. Definitely be fun for me to discuss. But yeah, before we get into the deeper stuff, you want to talk about your background a little bit, how you got into fitness, how that kind of transitioned into your later years.
Yeah. So in general, I mean, I always grew up as a really active kid. I grew up on a farm in like a small town in Ohio. So there's kind of this combination of spending my summers like working with animals and then doing chores on the farm. And also just my parents, for some reason, my parents aren't super into sports. My dad's not a big sports fanatic, but growing up, me and my brothers, we always played sports growing up. So as a kid playing baseball and soccer, and basketball, and then getting into junior high, we weren't even big enough as a school to have a soccer team. So eventually transitioned into cross country, basketball, and then did track and field because I was just this kind of uncoordinated tall kid, terrible at baseball. I was a right fielder. If that if you know baseball, like the kid that's a right fielder in Little League is the kid that sucks, so they just threw me in right field. But yeah, so played those sports all through junior high and high school. And then kind of in the middle of high school, tail end of high school, I actually started getting into, basically kind of got into CrossFit back in like the old days. I mean, this would have been, 2010, 2009. I had a teacher who was a big mentor of mine growing up. He was my 8th grade basketball coach, biology teacher. But he also had a background in kinesiology. So he'd gotten a master's from, I think, Emporia State, some university in Kansas, got a master's degree in kinesiology, had done a little bit of research there, and then kind of ended up teaching. And he was just a super fit dad with 4 kids, just absolute, he was a stud. I mean, he was just like this, he put us all to shame. And he was... Yeah, and he was kind of into like the CrossFit style workouts, that cross training. And he actually trained my brother, who was, 3 years older than me. Him and a couple of his friends trained with him in high school, particularly like their senior year. And I think that was a big catalyst for the reason why my brother, was able to then go on and walk on to the football team at Iowa State. Was, he would essentially go to track practice. And then after track practice, he would go to a full workout, 3 days a week, training up in the weight room. And so those were like the OG days of CrossFit, back when it was just like, like the old style Reddit forum. Like that was basically all that like the CrossFit website was. It was kind of before the games, before like Reebok and like before it kind of blew up as a scene. But you know, like all those kind of bad things about CrossFit that people talk about, not having kind of like the technical knowledge for some of those more like complicated movements, especially like the Olympic lifts. That can kind of be like the downside of CrossFit. We didn't really have that. I mean, he was a very technically sound trainer and everything like that. So that was kind of my first introduction into weightlifting. And like I said, I'd always been like really active. Like with running cross country, I always kind of had that very strong like cardio background. And then getting into college, basically just kind of stopped running. It was just one of those things, like if running was almost like a social thing for me, like me and my buddies all did it. And it was fun because with cross country, you know, you're running on grass paths and you've always got turns and stuff. And then with competitions, you've always got someone to race against in a way. And I just didn't have that. I mean, running itself wasn't fun. It's monotonous, you know, so I kind of just got more into just general weightlifting, playing pickup basketball, intramurals, you know, flag football and stuff like that. And as you know, because of like the sound body test that we had in the fraternity, which when I explain that to people are like blown away. They're like, wait, like your fraternity made you take like a fitness test every semester? I'm just like, yeah, like yours didn't.
Yeah, man.
Which is such a cool part of that like culture. And so I never really worried about running in college because I could always run a sub-6 mile when called upon to do it once a semester, do the sound body mile. It just, all right, I can get a 5:56 if I really kill myself here. Like that's all that matters to me. So still kind of,
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And so I still had that just kind of baseline cardio fitness basically. Started weightlifting a little bit more, and then I would say grad school is probably when I started to lose all that cardio. I went from probably, 200, 210 in undergrad to, mid 220s, 230s. I've got a whole Excel sheet tracking my weight across like the last 3 years. And it essentially starts when I was like, all right, I'm too heavy. And so I was like, 230, 232. And then you see me creep up like right before Christmas one year up to like 238. And then at that point, like I just decided it was like 2017 or something like that. I was like, nope, I got to start like dialing this back. I was just starting to get a little bit too like husky.
Right. It's uncomfortable.
So I was like, just like, it's been like a slow peter back, but having like, just when I put on that weight, I finally lost all that kind of cardiovascular fitness. And so starting to transition that. So this has been a long-winded history, but
that's the stage.
And then and then I would say after grad school, probably, I guess it was basically like last summer, I was just lifting. I was kind of in a 9-to-5 after grad school, and I was just going to the gym like 5 days a week, and it was good. Like I was getting stronger, but it was kind of one of those things like I don't have anything to work towards. So when David Crowbar came back down after his internship in Cleveland, we kind of sat down and we kind of made this powerlifting program. And I'm obviously not a powerlifter. I'm 6'5", long-armed, 210 pounds, but I was just like, all right, like I'm always interested in trying different programs. Yeah. We can maybe talk about that a little bit more later if we get the chance, but I'm always excited to kind of step up to a new challenge. And so I was like, yeah, like let's do this. We had like a 14 or 16 week program. Ended up competing USPA in like December of last year. And it was just it was kind of mind-opening experience to, run a program like that. I think he talked a lot about the details of the program on the podcast, so I won't get too into that, but it was interesting for me because that was my first time really stepping under some heavy weights. I was always kind of sitting in that 6 to 8 reps kind of thing, squat, deadlift, bench. I didn't venture any lower than that or heavier than that. Yeah. So I think the heaviest I'd pulled before that program was like 405 for a triple. And actually when we started out the program that we were on, I'd tweaked my back warming up in deadlift. So I didn't even have like a real max. So we're just like, all right, well, like it'll take a couple of weeks for you to really like work out this tweak in your back. So we'll just operate off of like a 420 like max at that point.
Right.
And like, so as far as deadlift goes, it really was like a 11-week program, but it ended up being kind of interesting because by the end of that, I ended up pulling 227.5 kilos. So it's like just a hair over
Yeah.
500 pounds.
That's
And
solid.
the meet day, yeah, the meet day was just interesting too. It was cool. I think I jumped up 40 pounds in like the last lift because like in a powerlifting competition, it always goes squat, bench, deadlift. So like the very last lift of the day, I was walking up to the table to tell them like my third attempt because I was going from like, what was it? It was like 210 was my second attempt in kilos. So it was like 462. And I was just like, oh yeah, I could just go for like 480 or something like that. And Crowbar kind of leans over the judges table. He's like, dude, 227.5 is 500 pounds. I was like, man, that's a lot of weight. He's like, yeah, but he's like, what did we come here for? I was like, shoot, yeah, like this is the last lift of the day. Like we came here to lift some heavy weights, see how strong we are. Like I might as well send it. And there's something about deadlift too, where it's like, I've always enjoyed that more. I think it's just like that farm boy in me where it's just like,
Yeah.
I'm just picking up something really heavy and then just like setting it back down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, oh, like you don't want me to like toss this over there. Like you don't want me to like carry this over to the barn. Like this is easy. So deadlift's always been my favorite, and probably because it's the one that I struggle the least with. Squats and bench, there's always that idea of like when I go super heavy, there's a bar on top of me. If I fail on bench, all of a sudden I'm trapped under this bar. If I fail on squat, I've got to bail out of it somehow. Deadlift is just like, man, if it's too heavy, just let go.
Yeah.
So there's always kind of been this like weird psychological thing too for me. And yeah, so I just kind of like got 500 pounds just off of the ground, and then kind of had this like half second where I was like, I don't know if this is going to come up. And I just kind of thought to myself, like, screw it, we're here, let's try. And that was a cool experience.
Yeah,
sure.
man, that sounds like a very successful first meet, all in all. It brings me back to, I did a first competition last December as well, and I definitely left some pounds on my deadlift. I wish I would have had someone like speaking in my ear, like, okay, you could definitely go. I hit 455, and I think I probably could have had 475 at least. But yeah, that's one of the benefits of having your training partner there to push you.
And especially have someone that experience too. Like he knows, and he's trained with me so much that he can tell, how much I've got left in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always something that's good too. I think yours was on like the same exact weekend that ours was on.
Oh, really?
In December. Yeah, like I remember posting about it. I think you posted about it like the same day. I was like, that's just crazy.
Yeah, because Crowbar gave me shit. He was like, Robbie just pulled 500. I was like, all right.
Yeah. But notice we've only talked about my deadlift because my bench and my squat were trash. So those are, like I said, I think both of those lifts, I only got my first attempt. So bench I was just like a ball of nerves, like going up there, like being that jacked up on pre-workout essentially at that point, pre-workout pneumonia. I was just like jittery. And so I didn't get either of my second or third attempt on bench or squat, which was interesting. So then also too, just like the redemption and getting all my attempts on deadlift and just crushing a PR. Right. That was good. So, but I've been out of the game since then. I had an injury that was nagging me towards the tail end of that program, and then found out in May that there was actually like a sports hernia. So I had like a whole 3-month period of like trying to take it easy on this injury and trying to figure out what was wrong. And eventually just went to a surgeon. He's like, yeah, you've got a sports hernia. Let's cut you open and get you fixed up. So just now starting to get back into the gym and benching, not really doing anything other than like body weight stuff for lower body. So it's an interesting moment to kind of stare even at like 135 pounds on the bar and just like wish I could deadlift that, but I can't right now.
Yeah. So. I want to get into that because I've never had an injury that serious, but to take it back real quick, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, from our discussions in the past, it never seemed like you had like followed powerlifting much before you competed. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I never really followed it. I mean, I'd seen, I think that there's something really cool about strength. I think it's Aristotle that says that, no man has the right to be an amateur in physical training just because of the beauty and strength of the human body.
Right.
There's just that overall concept. I'd seen like the Born Strong documentary on Netflix with like
Right.
all the strong men
Mm-hmm.
competing at the Arnold, but I'd
Is that the
never
one where they
really been.
use labs?
Yeah, they like walk into OSU's labs,
Yeah.
and I recognize like one or two of the
Yeah.
professors. Yeah,
I saw
you're
that
just
one.
like, oh, like I know that.
Right. Okay. Totally sidetracked. Keep going.
Yeah, no, it was cool because I think I was supposed to get a chance to like meet them, and because that was like the one year that I took an actual like kinesiology course, and the professor was like, yeah, just like swing by the lab, and so I just kind of like sat in this hallway like hoping to catch an eye, but I think they kind of had a change in plans, and so they didn't get to meet any of the strongmen, but that would have been a cool experience.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, aside from that, like didn't really follow, any of the bodybuilding culture stuff, or, my Instagram feed did not have any, like I didn't follow Steve Cook, at that point in time. I wasn't really involved in like the culture of weightlifting as much. So that was kind of my first like foray into that.
Right. So then are you the type of person that kind of just like, if a challenge comes along your way, you'll go in on it and give it your all? Or was it the type of thing where like, David he's training, so you hop in with him and see what happens? How did that kind of transcend?
It was kind of both of those things.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of discussions on training, and so it was something where I just thought, man, I'm not stalling out in my training, but not having an end goal, because there was kind of this thought of like I was just going to the gym 5 days a week, and I just a couple times had this thought. I was like, man, do I just like keep doing this? I just go to the gym, 5 days a week until I'm dead. Like, is this it? Like, is this what I'm supposed to do? And so just not having like an end goal, and too with like powerlifting, it's like, all right, there's an end date to it. If I compete on December 9th, if December 10th I never want to pick up a barbell again, like I can do that and not feel that like I've quit, because you've accomplished your goal, like you've competed. So if I want to go on and I want to do a triathlon next, maybe I would train for the triathlon for 4 months, and then I can do a triathlon, and I've done it. And if it's not for me, then I can go on and do the next challenge. Or if I want to go do yoga and become a yoga instructor, I guess there's no real end goal with that one. But like a competition gives you like a finite end date where you can say, I'm working until here. And then if I pivot and change what I want to do after that, I haven't, abandoned this. I've just essentially changed my goals after, hopefully attaining some other ones.
Yeah. You bring up a really valid point with that kind of fork in the road where you could be like, well, am I just going to kind of casually go to the gym and like until I die to stay healthy and try to feel good? Or do I want to push myself and try to really get into this? And I think that's why I'm a big fan. I feel like you're probably more of a fan of like the type of gym that you go to, where there's more, more of a membership that are pushing towards some type of tangible end date or goal. And then on the other hand, when you go to more general gyms, you see that kind of like lethargic or lackadaisical type of member. And there's nothing wrong either way, but I just find that to be an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
And
I think you kind of feed off of that energy. Like,
yeah,
if you go in gung ho to like an LA Fitness, like you'll find one or two people that take it seriously, but overall you're going to essentially regress back to whatever the overall attitude of that gym is, as far as how hard they train. And, the gym that we go to down in Grandview, it's got, some pretty serious lifters. So you kind of have that environment, which makes it hard for me right now, because,
oh yeah,
I am just kind of in this like, oh, like I feel like I'm falling apart, or like I see someone even just squatting 225. I'm just like, man, like I'd love to be just warming up at 225 right now. But
yeah,
so it's harder in that respect. But it's good, because I think sometimes it can be a little defeating, because you go to a serious gym, and if you're not like a world-class athlete, you're going to be intimidated and almost feel a little bit like defeated, because you'll be one of the smaller people in that gym. But it gives you like good resources. I mean, I don't utilize them as much, but you know, David's always talking with other people about their training, talking to the GM and the
Mm-hmm.
owner and the coach of the powerlifting team there. So there's always like resources, and you just kind of get hyped up almost. You take it more seriously because you surround yourself with serious people.
Yeah, yeah. I've always noticed that when I'm in a setting like that. And I think there's a lot to be said for it. And yeah, like it doesn't have to be that you want to do a lifting competition, but I like that. I like your open-minded perspective. Whereas like a lot of the guests are like strictly like I want to do like bodybuilding or powerlifting. But I like
Mm-hmm.
your approach where you're like, hey, I did this. It was really cool. Maybe I will do it again, maybe not. But I'm gonna keep striving for more, whether it be like you said, triathlon, yoga, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah.
I think
And
there's
even just to be like an amateur, you know, in powerlifting, like you get an appreciation for that sport. You know,
Mhm.
having just played a sport like basketball competitively on some level, it's like, yeah, I didn't play in college competitively, but I can still like watch an NBA game and appreciate kind of like the finer points or like how hard that is. You know, you have all these kind of armchair quarterbacks of, oh, like that's, you know, XYZ isn't that hard. It's like, well, like you never really done it. You know, I can watch like a world class tennis match and kind of say, oh, like that's not that hard. It's like, but I've never played tennis.
yeah,
So you just get like so much of an appreciation. You kind of have this whole world that's opened up to you just because you've kind of taken a little peek into it.
right. Great points there. To
Yeah.
get back to your kind of like background with the education and all, we talked before we started recording about some of the things you did in your master's program, but what exactly was your undergraduate degree at Ohio State?
Yeah. So my undergrad degree at Ohio State was actually a bio degree.
Okay.
Um, I would say technically it was based on like a pre-med degree. I'd never had any intention of going pre-med. Um, Kind of going back to the injury side of things, I had an injury when I was in high school. I think my junior year in basketball, I kind of got flipped over someone's shoulder and really messed up my arm and kind of like limped through the rest of the season of basketball with that injury. And then was also trying to do track with that injury and I pole vaulted. So I would actually have instances where you bend the pole and pole vaulting, and then you kind of have to essentially release that tension to vault yourself up over.
Right.
And when I would go to release that, I would have this like weird twisting, grinding thing happen in my. It was almost like a dislocate, like a minor dislocation.
That sounds gnarly
Um,
for pole vault,
yeah,
especially.
it was pretty gnarly. And finally, after that was over, my parents were like, "All right, we're gonna send you to physical therapy," because they thought I'd just ice it, take some ibuprofen, you'll be fine. You know, kind of that rub some dirt in it mentality. That's probably one of my. That was probably like the bad side of growing up on a farm is that they're
Right.
just like, "Oh yeah, like you'll be fine." And I was like, "I don't know, mom. Like I don't think my shoulder should click like that when I move it." And eventually, I did go to PT, and I'll say this: from what I've heard, my PT experience was unique in a bad way.
Hmm.
I've talked since then about other people that went to physical therapy and had great experiences, but mine was kind of going to a PT and he kind of assessed me, and then he kind of passed me off to the PTA, the physical therapy assistant, and
Okay.
I did all my exercises and hands-on stuff with the PTA for like 6 weeks, and then he did a reassessment and then he discharged me. So growing up, like I said, one of my big mentors was my biology teacher who had a kinesiology background. So I loved anatomy, loved physiology, loved fitness, and I thought initially that I wanted to go into physical therapy. And after that experience, I was like I was kind of turned off by it.
Right.
Um, and I was essentially like I was very like I hate to say smart, but like I don't mean to toot my own horn, but like I was a pretty smart person growing up, so I was always very inquisitive. I liked the idea of like critical thinking. So growing up in a small town, you don't have a lot of um, you don't have an idea of like what all is out there for people with brain power.
Yeah.
Essentially, my thought was, if you're smart, become a doctor or a lawyer or like a scientist. Like those are like the only ways to use your brain. If you're into science and you like critical thinking, go and become a scientist. So essentially, I thought that if I can do research on sports biomechanics, on athletic injuries, and I can have a slight effect across thousands and thousands of people, that's just as good to me as being a physical therapist and rehabbing somebody back. So I was like, man, if I can just improve this field and, make physical therapy better across the board in some way, like that would be cool. That would be me contributing to that.
Yeah.
So I want to do kinesiology, and essentially my parents kind of said, maybe we should do bio, because they thought I would have, better employment opportunities, or I could it is a more general degree. So there's just kind of more opportunities if I want to do a different type of research, or if I did want to go to like med school or be a PA or something like that. There's kind of a broader spectrum of things that you could do.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up doing research in a lab at Ohio State my sophomore year through the end that was all about ACL injuries. So that was very cool. We would actually bring in the OSU's like incoming freshman football team, or like football class.
Yeah.
And we would do all of these assessments. We would do all these like muscle strength. We would do DEXA scans. We would do drop jump testing with like 3D motion capture systems.
Nice.
And so we would look at essentially like their angles, like their valgus angles, and like knee joint flexion, stuff like that, in regards to them landing from like a maximal jump.
Yeah.
And then we would take that data and we would kind of sit on it, and then we would look and see, over the course of their career, who got injured. And so one of the big things with research is all right, teasing out, it's like, okay, like this group here got injured and this group didn't. What makes them different? So you have like higher muscular imbalances in a group that gets injured, or like with knee flexion, you'll see less knee flexion, more knee valgus, things like that. And with football players, it's a little bit different because they do have contact injuries.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of research that shows how we can reduce non-contact injuries, and contact injuries are obviously a little bit hazier because it's, in a non-contact injury, it's you and the forces you're exerting on the ground. Whereas contact, obviously there's some outside force affecting them. And it was interesting. I got really into research. I was probably working there 12 hours a week during undergrad, unpaid. Hindsight, it was terrible that I was working 12 hours a week for free, but it really was the reason I got into grad school. I mean, the summer before my senior year, I spent a summer in Germany working in a orthopedic hospital there, helping with some research. And so I got to come back and like get one of those big poster presentations and like a research forum when I came back to the States. So like some really cool experiences because of that. And then obviously that experience, and then having the letters of recommendation from that lab were probably what got me into, my grad program at University of Texas.
Yeah.
So,
quick question.
Yeah.
So with the non-contact injuries and the part where you were kind of examining the muscular imbalances, I mean, so you had the DEXA scan, which I would imagine might provide a little bit of insight. Did you notice any particular set of imbalances, like a trend line throughout the class? Was it like posterior imbalance, or what did that look like? Do you know?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit rusty on a lot of this stuff. I haven't brushed up on it. The DEXA scan was something a little bit separate. That was kind of just some extra data we collected. It wasn't necessarily related to what we were doing. I think they got some bone mineral density data from them to kind of see. I mean, obviously those guys have incredible bone mineral density. Yeah. And just kind of like an aside, I had to enter a lot of that data into the computer at one point, and I was just like typing in these guys' BMIs into like the Excel sheet. And like, BMI is like not a great predictor of, obesity in like very athletic populations. So like there's some guys where like I remembered who they were, and I was typing in their information. I'm like, this guy's got a BMI of 30, but I remember seeing him doing like box jumps, and like this guy's got a six pack, he's like 6'4", 230, and he's got, or whatever it would be to have like a BMI of 30, 31. Yeah. And he's probably, like 8% body fat. So that was just kind of like a funny memory. It was just like, oh, like this is not normal. But
and still people
in general
take BMI to heart.
Yeah. So in general, one of the big things I remember with muscular imbalances is anytime you have like limb to limb imbalances, that's going to make you a little bit more predisposed to an injury. Yeah. But one of the big things too is quad ham ratios. So people that are quadricep dominant tend to be more at risk for ACL injuries. And you see that especially with female athletes. I mean, the gender differences in non-contact ACL injuries are massive. I think it's somewhere between 4 to 7 times as many, female athletes getting non-contact ACL injuries, in sports like volleyball, soccer. There's one other I can't think of, but obviously girls don't really play football that much. But like sports like volleyball and soccer, they're like 3 to 7 or 4 to 7 times more likely to get an ACL injury.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different factors that go into that. I mean, there's some skeletal things. I think like the slope of the head of their tibias can be slightly different. They have slightly different Q angles. But one of the big things that they focus on is how do we reduce the risk of injury? Because like we can't change those factors. We can't change hormonal factors that might take place. We can't change their Q angles. So what are some like the musculature changes that we can do? So like one of the big things is like hamstring strengthening exercises, or even just training people on how to. When I was in Germany, they would say like land softly. So essentially, if you land softly, you just intuitively have more knee flexion.
Right.
So the moment a lot of the forces are different in that sense. So I would say the big thing that I remember off the top of my head was quad ham ratios, and then 2, a lot of weak like glute medis can also be a big problem.
Yeah, especially with the valgus. Yeah.
So those are a couple of big ones.
Yeah, man. That's interesting stuff. It almost kind of makes me wish that I could have been involved with that, because with at least my program, we never really got into like that like overall biomechanics and that area of the field. And it reminds me of when I was in high school, we never really trained like hamstrings that well. I remember, at least in the beginning, because like in the middle of my high school career, our weight room was like a dungeon. It got redone to be super nice. We had like no way to train hamstrings except for RDLs. And like I don't know if we didn't take it seriously as athletes, or just like the coaches weren't the best at describing a hinge. But we were like, what do RDLs even do? Like, this is stupid. We always skipped RDLs. And like, I'm not even trying to call this dude out because he's one of my best friends, but my friend Nathan, I like specifically remember working out with him once, and he was like, I'm skipping RDLs. And this poor guy got a lot of lower body injuries when he was playing at Youngstown State. Would it have made a difference? I don't know. He was definitely predisposed, and he got hit. He had an injury sliding. So it could just be causation and correlation, but that's interesting, because I feel like a lot of younger athletes don't correctly train their hamstrings, and it could prevent so many injuries.
And the coaches too don't have that background. I mean, I don't know about where you went to high school, but where I went to high school, the football coaches that were, the strength coaches for it were history teachers. Right. And so a lot of times they're bringing concepts from the 80s, 90s, from when they were back in high school, or if they played in college, when they played in their college programs. And there's a lot of things that have changed since then, like as far as how to optimally train an athlete. And sometimes it's just, all right, let's make these athletes bigger, faster, stronger. And, it's not necessarily training them for their exact task that you're asking them to carry out in competition. So like squats are great, if you're, in general, if you're stronger with squats, it correlates to a higher vertical max. But if you want to optimally train, for vertical jump, you might have a guy do half squats instead. But nobody's going to, especially like in high school, you're going to look at the kid doing half squats in the corner, and you're going to be like, oh, this kid's half repping, like, got to go ass to grass, dude. Right. And it's like, but think about it. Like, if you ever gone up for a rebound, think about like the bottom of that, like when you're kind of gearing up to jump, you're not anywhere near like a full squat. So it's about kind of training like that optimal range of motion. And then too, like you see just like the injury rates in youth sports. And that's just such a big thing. It's that in some ways ended up kind of turning me off of research, because we have all of this knowledge that we've accumulated over years. I mean, some of the research on gender differences and ACL injuries and some of the factors, goes back to like the late 90s. And I'm just like, man, like we have all this information, this ivory tower that just like isn't getting out to the people that actually need to use it.
Huh.
And so you see some of that stuff coming up now where it's like, oh, we're like training people to like reduce injuries. And you see it in, typically elite college programs or professional sports. And you're just like, man, like we've been sitting on this information for like 15 years. It's like, how are we just now like implementing this? So that's also kind of one of those things that like, in the end, almost kind of like turned me off to research in some ways.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, man, like we're trying to find the answers to like these increasingly smaller and smaller problems. Like you chisel out the rough sculpture and then you eventually get on the details. But it's like, man, we're not even passing like the bulk of this information on in some ways. So
That's a
it's
very interesting insight, man. I've never known because, I never did that much research, but that is frustrating, most definitely, to just know that it's there and could be like, especially with your kind of like your vision or your like your mission statement when you're saying like, I want to just like, even if I could just help like a couple people or make an impact that would help people, I can definitely see where you'd be frustrated when that
yeah,
information is already out there and they're just not implementing it.
yeah. And so I think that's something I'll look to do in the future is to kind of be that conduit between, the researchers and like the people that are actually doing it, maybe providing resources to like youth programs where like now you're learning how to properly like prehab, do essentially like prehab exercises for your athletes and such, because there's a huge economic price to it too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I want to say it was upwards of billions of dollars a year in medical expenses due to ACL injuries. I could be wrong about that number, but I'm pretty sure it's upwards of over $1 billion. And then just to like, you think about the long-term impacts. I had a friend that, tore his ACL in high school playing football, and that was pretty much the end of it for him being physically active. Ever since then, he's, other than maybe riding a bike to work, he didn't, continue being active. So think about the long-term consequences of having all these people that kind of like, oh, I've got this like nagging shoulder injury, so I don't play, sports anymore. And it's like,
right.
if we could kind of prevent that, 30, 40 years down the road, you're looking at a healthier person.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's big impacts there.
Yeah.
When you spent the summer in Germany, did you notice any like major cultural differences in there? You said you were in like a hospital, or what was it, orthopedic? What was it setting?
Yeah, it was like an orthopedic
Okay.
hospital.
Okay.
And essentially there was a biomechanics lab operating out of that. So some of it they were doing, I think they might have done a little bit of work with kids with like cerebral palsy, but a big interest of theirs was also kind of the sports side of things.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. There's a huge cultural difference. I mean, just in how their cities are laid out, it was a very cool experience because I could essentially get anywhere I wanted to, riding a bike, taking the bus, or taking a train. I had a couple of coworkers at the orthopedic hospital. One guy, he's in his 30s. I don't think he did any other kind of physical activity, but most days when the weather was good during the summer, especially, he would ride his bike to work, and it was probably 40 minutes each way.
Oh wow.
So you have kind of this, yeah. So you have just kind of this like, he's biking 10 miles a day or something like that. And if that's all he does, then like he's already, great as far as looking at his health in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting sports culture over there too. I would say that overall the weightlifting scene is not the same. You don't just kind of go to a gym and go work out or run on a treadmill. You have a lot more people that are like, oh, we go cycling or we'll play sports. And it seemed like a lot more people were specialists. So quick caveat, I mean, I was technically a student at the University of Heidelberg when I was there. So I would spend some time with like the sports students. And so they were obviously like very specialized in like what they do. They're like, oh, like I'm a track athlete.
Yeah.
And so there is a little bit of, bias there because I was just exposed to people that were probably more specialized in what they do. But, overall, obviously everybody plays soccer there. And then handball is a big thing too. I don't know if you ever heard of handball.
Right.
It's like a combination of like soccer and dodgeball almost.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I thought it was pretty fun when I played in the past. My roommate was on the handball team at OSU, so I would just like go and play with him sometimes. It gets like,
oh really?
It was fun.
I went to like a barbecue one time and it was like all the kids were playing and they're like, told me that I should play, and I didn't speak any German, and I didn't really know how to play, but I was just kind of like tossing the ball around, like it did something, and I scored on them almost on accident. And like I kind of turned around, I was like, was that okay? Did I accidentally travel too much? Because you can take like 3 or 4 steps.
Yeah.
And so I just like did that, and I like threw the ball, and I was like, is that okay? And they're like, yeah, you're good, or whatever the equivalent of that is in German. So
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring those differences up. Um, I know one thing we might have talked about it before is a supplement company that I've worked with. They're based out of Germany, and the main guy that I work for, Stefan, I'll have to share this with you because he'll be thrilled to know that someone was able to experience his country. He loves it. He described to me a little bit about their like exercise science program, and like they really had tests that they had to do, like physical tests, not just, whereas like at Ohio State we just did paper tests. We really didn't have to prove if we could swim well or weight train or run well. But like you said, it's almost like more performance based. Um, and I don't know. I mean, that to me, it almost sounds a little bit more credible and better that they have that type of testing. Um, but yeah, it's just interesting that they have the differences in that maybe as a result or in conjunction with their whole society is set up where you can be, it's easier to be physically active.
yeah, it's just very much, I mean, just the way their cities are laid out, and then just like their culture as far as how things go. I mean, even the way they structure their sports, is a lot different than how we do in like US. It's very like locally based. So like we've got like our Pop Warner football, and then you've got all these like YMCA football or basketball, and then you've got this other program that all kind of operate in like the same local area. Whereas
Yeah.
there it's like, this is the neighborhood handball team. And then if you really want to, you can play for like the city's handball team, and it kind of escalates from there. So you have this like interesting kind of talent. And I think it's a little more like, I think that a lot of their sports are also kind of coordinated by the government too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit more efficient in some ways as far as like identifying talent, things like that.
Yeah.
Here we've got like the NCAA, but then we've got like the pro like organizations are all different. They're all organized slightly differently. So
Yeah.
it's like a weird but an interesting difference.
Yeah. So you had obviously some great research experience and an awesome like study abroad type of situation where you were able to bring that back and present, which probably impressed the graduate programs out there. But was there anything in particular that made you want to take that step and continue your education?
I mean, the big thing was just the idea that I wanted to go into research.
Mm-hmm.
Really, at least a master's. I mean, my thought process behind it was essentially master's, PhD, and then go be a professor somewhere and like do research and have like a research lab.
Yeah.
Um, and so kind of towards the tail end of the master's, I just, I wasn't really sure if the research thing was, for like a PhD, it's like another 5 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, after you graduate undergrad, you've got 6 or 7 years, depending on how long your PhD goes,
Right.
before you're even starting, your career. And then from there, you've got maybe some non-tenure track positions as an associate professor to get like a tenure track position, and
Mm-hmm.
then kind of just dive into like how the research stuff works in general. As like a tenure track professor, you're trying to just pump out research papers. You're trying to pump out publications, because then that's how they assess whether or not you get tenure. So it's really cutthroat in some ways. I mean, people don't think about academia being cutthroat, but it kind of can be. It's just you're very limited in like how much funds there are for grants, especially this was 2016, 2017, like I think post like Trump election, you just kind of saw this like shrinking of the National Science Foundation's grants. So all of a sudden, if that shrinks a little bit, that makes how competitive those grants are exponentially greater, because as you're competing for grants, if you cut that in half, all of a sudden you go from a 99% rejection rate to 99.5. So it's now 1 in 100 to 5 in 1,000. So it's just it's very competitive for grants, and you have to be doing a certain type of research. Everybody, you know, when they go and do their master's and PhD, like they're like, I want to go work with like college athletes and elite athletes. And there's just not a lot of them. And so they're hard to come by for one. And then at the same time, there's not a lot of money to study them because there's not a huge like economic from like the government standpoint as far as how they alleviate grant or allocate grant money. There's not a huge economic incentive to study elite athletes.
Yeah.
Taking a cyclist, you know, knocking 0.5% off of their time, which for them makes them a world champ or a record breaker or something like that. Really cool for them, but at the end of the day, that doesn't affect 99.999% of people.
Right.
So getting into grad school, it was interesting because my interest kind of expanded. The research lab that I was going into had just wrapped up a grant working with veterans that had like trans-tibia amputees. So they had all lost a limb below the knee and were essentially working on stability. And we had these really interesting treadmills that could introduce like reverberation. So like the treadmills could shift side to side, forward to back. And there was a whole virtual reality projection system that could project dots onto the treadmill. So you can now try to, or you have to step on this one, or you can't step on that one. So all of a sudden you're walking normal, and then there's a obstacle that you can't touch. So you have to take that extra long step, you know? So thinking about like if you're going like hiking or something like that, and you're hiking, all of a sudden there's a rock and you have to step further than you would. So it's very much like an obstacle that you would encounter in like everyday life. And that was cool. I would have really been excited to work with veterans, but that grant had just wrapped up and they weren't going to renew it. And then everything's kind of geriatric populations. So working with the elderly, essentially keeping grandma from falling and breaking her hip and going to hospice. Or one of the classes I took was exercise as medicine. So looking at people that have Parkinson's or diabetes, like how do we train these people? Because not only do they have this condition that might limit their, you know, physical abilities, but you have to consider the fact that a person with Parkinson's might not be able to sense that they're overexerting themselves and sense that they're overheating and their body's not responding with like the proper amount of sweat. So you might have to consider these things when you're training them. So it was a very interesting look into kind of this more like general, how do we help people with chronic conditions? How do we help the elderly really like improve their daily lives? So that's a, you know, a big, like economic cost from like medical expenses, but even just like the human side of things, like think about how happy people are when you can get up from the couch and it's not like a maximal effort squat, you know, and how much better your quality of life is and how much longer you're going to live because you have that ability just to do activities of daily life.
I got it.
All right.
Yeah. So with the research side of things, I find it like you were saying, like certain things would get funded, certain things wouldn't. I don't know if you heard on the podcast with Crowbar when I was talking about the study that I did at Ohio State. Did you catch that one?
In general, I can't remember what you guys did. Can you?
Yeah. So it was kind of just like crazy tests to evaluate the efficacy of the float tank therapy. And I think honestly, the only reason that one got funded was because it was partnered with the Air Force. Of course, like similar to the one where you could drastically increase someone's quality of life by, you know, working with veterans or, you know, helping someone get off the couch easier. That one, if you could help, you know, like soldiers as they could recover in like a combat situation or, you know, a training situation, it could definitely have some cool benefits to it. And yeah, that was like a hellish routine that they put me through where I had to like squat 6 by 10, and I started at 80% of my 1 rep max, and then I had to like drop pounds, like 10 pounds after like the third set. I would like go down by 10 because it was just the worst thing. But yeah, man, there was like blood draws, jumping on a force plate, all this crazy stuff. But
there's a lot of cool stuff with like sensory deprivation tanks, though. I think that's an interesting like avenue, and that's like a big thing with the military. I know like the SEALs will use them as well. Like they're looking at stuff with PTSD,
Yeah.
using information tanks. I
Mm.
did one in grad school where it was similar like blood draws and like activity stuff. So they were looking at how essentially being sedentary for a large period of the day can affect your gains or affect your workout or performance if you go and work out. So if you sit for 8 hours a day and then you go and work out, are you getting the same gains or the same stimuli that you get if you're doing activity throughout the day and then you're going and do a workout?
Yeah.
So there was like a couple of days where I had to limit my steps to like less than like 600 steps or something like that. It was
That'd be
nuts.
so hard.
Period. And then like I would go in and I'd do like sprints on this like sprint bike
Okay.
because like they told me I was one of like the bigger guys that had done it. They're like, yeah, like your watt output on this is insane. One of the guys was like this is like the highest one we've seen so far. But they would follow it up with these days I would come in and I would drink like a big like chocolate milkshake with like all this like heavy whipping cream and stuff. They wanted to look at metabolism as well.
Okay.
Have me drink this like really fatty shake, and then they would take blood draws every 2 hours for like the next, I guess for like the next like 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like see, essentially like how metabolically flexible I was.
Uh,
Um, and it was interesting because at one point they put in like this like soft needle that they just like left in there. So like
yeah.
I like went to class with this like needle stuck in my arm
Got some weird looks, I bet.
2 hours later, and like because it's a lot easier to do the blood draws when you're not like constantly re-stick them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was interesting, and got to see too. They would like spin down my blood, and so they showed me it's like all right, like when it separates out of the plasma, the red blood cells, just like all the triglycerides floating around in my system. It's just like this like opaque, foggy
Yeah.
substance. I'm just like, oh, like that's normal. They're like, yeah, that's totally normal. Like your body will get rid of that, in a couple hours essentially. I was like, wow, that is interesting.
Yeah. Man, that's so cool that I mean just like the research design in itself, it's like it's kind of it's kind of like phenomenal to me that people come up with that type of like really in-depth research design and they're able to like apply it because like mine, that one seems to be pretty drastic. Like it's not your run-of-the-mill study, at least I would think. um, and then what did you have like a certain area of research that you really dialed in on when you were in your program?
A little bit. So I had an interesting experience where the first year I was there, I was in a lab that was kind of in transition, like I said, from one project to the next.
Mm-hmm.
What happened at the end of my first year was the PI, the person in charge of that lab, ended up decided he was going to go to Penn State because he collaborated with someone at Penn State, and they were going to basically build him like the same facility but better at Penn
Yeah.
State. And so it's like, ah, man, I can't really knock that. But as far as a master's student, a lot of times that first year, you're kind of figuring out what you want to do, and you're probably already thinking about what you want your thesis to be. So like what
Yeah.
you want your study and such to be. So I kind of had to pivot into a new lab. There wasn't quite what I wanted to do. So it was more like a neuromuscular lab. So a lot more um, of that side of things, activation of the muscle, as opposed to the one I was in before was more gait and posture, a little
Yeah.
more mechanics like I was used to.
Right.
Um, and so what I ended up doing is I ended up just doing a report. I'd written up a new thesis for that professor and presented it to her, and she kind of said, if you want to do this, it's going to take you an extra half a year. And at that time, I had a long distance girlfriend, back in Ohio. And I thought, I don't think that news is going to go over super well. And also, I kind of wanted to wrap up on like a normal timeline. So
Yeah.
what I did was take some old data that she had, write it up as what you call like a report.
Mm-hmm.
So that was on, uh, it was on, motor unit firing rates
Mm-hmm.
and during ischemia. So
Okay.
essentially, an individual motor unit reacts during like blood flow restriction. So
Yeah.
something I think is like really interesting is blood flow restriction training.
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of the literature shows that you'll see, similar gains in hypertrophy and strength, depending on the research you look at, to like conventional. And so when you look at people coming back from, let's say they like tear their patella, you can't put a lot of stress on that joint. But what you can do with blood flow restriction training is you can still train the muscles essentially and get similar gains in hypertrophy and strength, but with 20-30% of the load. So instead of having like 60 to 70% of a maximal load, it's now 20%. And so that's going to be hard on the joints. You can do it. You still get all that fatigue. So I think that there's a lot of implications for that for rehab, but also even just elderly populations.
Yeah.
All right, you put it on a grandma, like on her upper thigh, and then she just walks down the hallway and she's getting more training. And, she doesn't have to do squats because she might not be able to do that very easily. So I think there's a lot of implications for both the geriatric population and, recovering athletes. But I was also just interested. I was like, all right, why does the muscle behave why it does? You get this, accelerated fatigue when you do these exercises. But it's not necessarily that you're really lacking any energy in that muscle. So it's looking at all of these different factors as far as the neurons and some of the changes in like conductivity that you get in those patients. So as metabolites increase, how does that affect how the motor, unit fires?
Yeah.
So it was very, very interesting project to work on.
Oh yeah. Well, that does sound, I feel like, while it might not have been like the 100% most ideal with the transition from the professor to Penn State, I feel like that kind of does have some application into like what you were originally interested in. So that's really interesting. Did the, like, what were the findings? Like, how did the motor units fire differently due to that buildup of metabolites?
I'd have to go back and look at it. I mean, it's been almost 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So knowledge like muscles atrophy over time. So
Right. Hey,
it's a
we'll
little
get a part two maybe, and I'll be grilling you on those specifics, man.
even just like a couple months out from that project, it was already just like I knew so much about it because I was so engrossed in it. But when you step
Yeah.
back a little bit, so much of that information is so specific,
Yeah.
and you have to remember this paper and how they structured their experiment versus this paper, they structured it, and like what were the different tests that they did, and like how those statistics don't quite line up, and like the difference, all these like little minutia
Right.
that separate things out. So I'd have to go back and
I
pull it
like
up. I could always send that to you sometime if you want to get
it, definitely. I feel
confused.
like there's definitely got to be like a burnout too, especially toward the end of, you've been in school for so long.
Yeah,
Now that you're done, you're like, okay, my brain needs a break.
exactly, and that's kind of what ends up happening, especially to natural procrastinator. So it was like a whole semester of just like cramming just to like make sure that I got this like done on time.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's interesting because you just kind of get so into it, and it's a lot of research, a lot of going down one rabbit hole just to go to a dead end, and then
Yeah.
have another rabbit hole to find like the right thing that you're thinking of, but you don't know if it even like exists in the literature exactly as you
Yeah.
want to figure it out.
Yeah. That's got to be frustrating. What I was like smiling during your explanation. I'll give you two guesses. Who do you think I did BFR training with first?
Nick Tobin.
Yep. You didn't even need the second guess.
He was all about,
He
especially back
was,
then, about throwing those on his calves, just
right?
like trying to make those things grow, man. But um,
You can't grow what just genetically isn't there.
yeah, like
I'm the
the calves
same.
are like one thing, yeah, the calves are like the one thing we'll admit that like there was just a big genetic factor in calves.
Yeah.
They were trained to their calves a day in their life and have like this massive calves. And you got guys like him to like train it constantly and just like can't quite get it to pop.
Yeah.
But
It's tough. I mean, I remember we did like biceps, and I had just no idea what I was in store for, and it
And,
was so rough.
and I think that's one of those things where I think the last guy that you had on brought this up, where anecdote in some cases drives research.
Yeah.
Because I think that was a thing. I think blood flow restriction training was a thing before it
Mhm.
was actually researched.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the dangerous part where it's like you got guys that, I mean, now you get people that are a little bit smarter. They use like an elastic band, but at one point you were throwing that on the top of your bicep and it was like a rope essentially you tied. And then obviously as your arm, as your bicep flexes, like your cross sectional area is increasing, but that rope just essentially becomes tighter. And it's like, all right, like how tight is too tight? Like you're just gonna blow out like a blood vessel here, like
Yeah.
for an artery. So there's a lot of interesting research as far as like usually they'll use some type of like blood pressure cuff, and the
Okay.
essentially like you can maintain a constant pressure.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
it's
cool.
typically like over the diastolic, but like less than the systolic. So you still want blood to be able to flow in, but
Okay.
not very flow out. So you still get kind of like that pooling effect. Um,
Interesting.
but yeah, that's like one of those like interesting things where there's just like phenomenon and people are just like doing this and training. Like nobody really knows why or if it works. And then like 5 years later, like the data catches up to it.
Hmm.
So it's interesting to see that.
Oh yeah. So we discussed a little bit about like what you've been working on currently, doing some sales. So how did you decided the PhD route wasn't necessarily what you wanted to do at that time? Maybe it's not for you in general. Um, don't want to speak for you, but how did you then transition from that master's program to your current role?
Yeah, so as I was wrapping up my master's, like you said, I was just kind of getting a little bit burnt out. I still had interest in a PhD, but I talked to decent amount of people that were professors, and a lot of them had taken a year or two off to kind of see what they thought of the real world.
Hmm.
And when I came back to Columbus and I moved back here after my master's, I talked to the person that was the head of the lab, the new head of the lab that I had worked in. She was like, "Yeah, like that's great." She's like, "I worked for a couple of years as a PT before going on to get back into research," and she said, "I knew within 6 months that I wanted to go back to research, but I still, worked in the real world for a couple of years before I finally made that transition back." And I kind of had the opposite thought after 6 months or a year was like, all right, like I don't think I'll ever go back because it is such a massive time commitment.
Hmm.
And then two, it's just you're essentially going back to being a broke grad student for 5 years.
Yeah.
Uh, kind of being in the real world and kind of having like a job where I'm actually making money and I can kind of see myself progress.
Hmm.
Uh, that makes it harder to step away. And two, now that I had that exposure to the real world, I've seen how I can use that same analytical mindset in the business world that I loved so much about research. I can look at things and analyze them and critique them. And that was just something I'd never really thought of until, you know, I was in my master's and I would talk to people that were consultants or something like that.
Hmm.
And I thought, man, it just seems like you kind of spend your day really analyzing it and dialing in and figuring out like what people are doing wrong and fixing systems. And that's like a lot of what research is. And so I can see how I can apply that to the business world. But when I first stepped out, I thought that I'd want to be like an exercise physiologist, and I especially was interested in working with those like special populations.
Yeah.
So I think NSCA has a special, like the CSCS has
Right.
like a specific application. So it's like once you've been like an exercise physiologist for a year or two, you can then go on and become someone that works with like chronic conditions or people with health.
I think that's like the highest, like, um, I want to say in quotes certificate. You know what I mean? Uh, like obviously you have to go through like a higher education, but
Yeah,
without like having to go to like a PhD or like med school type thing. I want to say that's like what we learned. That was like one of the higher things. Okay,
yeah.
so I'm with
And
you. Keep going.
I had a couple. I'd worked for a little bit as like a health specialist or whatever, and more on like the corporate side of things up in New Albany at Discover. So essentially, they have a gym at that campus that like all their employees can use.
Yeah.
Uh, and I enjoyed it there, but it just wasn't quite the right. draw for me.
Yeah.
Um, and then I thought maybe I would go more into med devices. I have this very strong orthopedic background.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what I was doing now initially was I wanted to get essentially a year of sales experience under my belt and
Right.
then go back into med devices because, the guys in, orthopedic sales and such, they're kind of look at my resume and they'll be like, oh, like your master's is cute, but they're like, you don't have any sales experience. So people selling, like knee replacements, stuff like that. It's a little bit more sales type of
Oh, yeah.
guy,
Oh, yeah.
like that boys club in some ways
Yeah.
than what I thought it would be. I thought it'd be a little bit more nerdy, people with more of a physiology background. Um, so we'll see. I like what I do now, but there is always the idea of going back into something a little bit more medically related. But I can always do that in 5, 10 years. We'll see.
Right. Yeah. You bring up a great point there. I wish in definitely in an undergrad, maybe even in like a master's level, they had more sales because like what I found was after I graduated as a personal trainer, you got to understand like it's okay to take someone's money if you can offer them a valuable service, excuse me. And I was like so like hesitant and timid about like this is the price, like come work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it took time and I feel like much better about it now. But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, you gotta, as a personal trainer, you've got to sell yourself.
Yeah.
As you have all this marketing, and you have to build a brand around that, and you have to figure out what do you really offer people. And you
Mm.
have to know what the market rate of other personal trainers that do what you do is. I mean, you get some people that you know can kind of leapfrog into charging a certain amount because I mean, if you're a nationally competitive athlete, that's going to add to your credentials in some ways as a personal trainer.
Yeah.
You can specialize in some way. So it's kind of figuring in with the whole social media thing, you have people building entire brands around something that they're offering online coaching. And there's some people that are really good at that. But you still have to sell that value in some way.
Yeah.
If you're charging $30 for your online coaching and somebody else is charging 20, well, like what makes your program better than this guy's?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true stuff.
Have you, like, as far as what you're doing now, how much of it is kind of more on the online side of things versus the in person?
Yeah. Well, since
Yeah,
COVID,
it's hard to do in person right now, I guess.
yeah. Yeah. Well, in New Jersey especially, I think we're one of the last, I want to say 3 states, maybe 4, that finally opened up gyms. So just this week, New Jersey opened up gyms. And my gym, because we're more hospital affiliated and, they want to make sure everybody has the correct training and all the systems are like 100% due to the nature of our members and clientele. We're actually going to open up next week. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that. But like you said, like I've learned so much about the necessity of understanding marketing, differentiating yourself on that front and more about sales on an online type of setting where like before the shutdown, I only did online training with people that I knew, like our friends from Ohio State or like maybe even high school friends. And
Yeah,
now it's getting to the point where like I've never met some of these people online. They just have like seen some of the stuff I put out and they, wanted to pursue coaching. So yeah,
yeah.
I think you hit it on the head with that. And I'm looking forward to a little bit more 50-50 balance of the online and in person, just because I do enjoy in person a lot. But I think like long-term financially, like people I've had on the podcast, they're killing it with online coaching. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I I envision myself going in the future. But
I think that's one of those things too. You have to build that foundation. You have to have those online clients of yours that really committed to your programming. Obviously, you can sell online coaching to somebody, and you can sell them a program, and they can kind of half-ass it. I don't know if I'm on your podcast or not. Is that okay? Okay. You can always bleep that out or something. But they might half-ass the program you send them. So you can send them like a great program, but you know they might half-ass it, and then you've got those guys that you just kind of need to build that base of success stories of hey, like guy, he was 190 pounds, you know, was overweight, and then I helped him drop down to 175 in
Yeah.
30 days or something like that.
Hmm.
So like once you kind of get that base and get that momentum going, I think that things will move a lot easier for you.
Yeah.
But it's a long, slow drag to get that unless you have some like really serendipitous thing happen that kind of
Yeah.
launches.
Yeah. And like, I feel like when I was first getting into like Instagram, I always thought that it would be like, hey, sometimes it's just gonna pop off and it'll get rolling. But I say like the biggest benefit of COVID for me was I just had like that time to lay the foundation, like you were saying. And it's had its challenges. Luckily, I've met people that have helped me along the way, but it's been a blessing in disguise. I don't know if that's the right way to put it because overall, COVID
Yeah,
is not great, but for
I
me,
get what
it's been it's been beneficial.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I sometimes I'll go on YouTube and I'll see somebody that gets 300,000 views per video, and I watch the whole video. I'm just like, I didn't really gain anything by that, but
Yeah.
they've got really good editing, or maybe that sometimes it's just being there at the right time. So they were there in like the earlier days of YouTube. So when
Hmm.
they exploded, they're already there. Or like when Instagram, you already had 1,500 followers, or you're just in like the right area. You're in LA County, and all of a sudden, every time you tag LA County in like your Fitspo post, you get 100 new followers.
Hmm.
Um, so it's really hard to do in that sense. As far as you can sometimes just look into it. Like I've said, I had a better point there, but I'm losing it right now. But I think
No.
too, this is what it was. Is that sometimes it's not always just about like your presence on social media, but it's like how much does that translate over to like actual income or like actually moving the ball forward. So it's like you could have 50,000 followers and get 50 clients out of that, or you could have 15,000 followers and you get 150 clients
Yeah.
out. It's generating those like true fans. It's not just
Yeah.
about getting the follow and just kind
Hmm.
of it's like puff of smoke, like smoke and mirrors as far as, hey, like I'm an influencer because I have XYZ number of followers. But at the end of the day, like if you were to put a supplement in your story and 1% of your followers buy it, that's not nearly as powerful as the guy that 20% of his followers are buying anything that he's selling, because you have to kind of develop a relationship or develop a rapport with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where I feel like I do have like a really solid, group of like followers that like we go back and forth and like because like people like us we just like talking, you know
Mm-hmm.
whether it be sports, training, exercise physiology even. Like I feel like I'm like pretty blessed to have that and like people like engage with it, and maybe down the road with like which is like some stuff that I've been working on is creating some products, creating some more general programs that don't have to be necessarily in a coaching setting. Maybe that'll gain some traction down the road just from that. So yeah,
Yeah, that's one of the cool things about some of the people we went to college with is like a lot of us are willing to kind of hype each other up.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I saw recently one of the guys that was in the fraternity with us. They started their own supplement company, and I knew like nothing about it, but I still their pre-workout. I follow them on Instagram. I'll probably buy some more of their pre-workout again when I need it. I don't take much pre-workout, so I
yeah,
do it very quickly. But it's like I'm here to support you. Like if I know you and we can all kind of help each other out, then it's always good to kind of have those connections and build those relationships.
oh yeah. Are you talking about Matt Iniger? Did he start
No,
it?
did he start a supplement company?
Well, maybe he's had that in the works. Who started one?
Grant Lynch and I think some of his friends from
Oh,
he lived in San Diego.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
I
so
saw something about that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely like to support that and check that out.
definitely I was thinking about it when you had to say they were gonna have to cut something out. You got to start cutting in some ads in the middle of here or something.
Yeah, shoot. I need sponsors. Hey, if
You need to get a German company to start sponsoring you and then throw in an ad. And you
right.
know I even think that if you just have like that promo code, I think that like the best way to do things is like you got a promo code and and you get 10% off this supplement, and then that company gives you some, royalty for selling
Yeah,
it.
like affiliate type.
Yeah, a lot of times people try to just work social media and be like, oh, I've got like 1 million followers, give me free dinner. It's like, I mean, you're from Spain, and most of your followers are from Europe, and you're in Denver. Like, how is that going to translate to business for
Right.
us? So it's they got to find those ways to make that money, get
Oh,
those, aside from the coaching, finding a way to
yeah. Hmm.
on that same avenue find
Right.
some generate income.
Yeah. And that makes me think of something where I feel like the I guess like the less amount of education you have with someone with a background like you and I, the more like creative you have to be with your streams of revenue. Um, Whereas like when I was finishing up undergrad, a lot of the grad students seem to be like, well, I was personal training and that was cool, but I wanted to be able to do more, so I went back to grad school for that reason. And I thought about, I was like, well, maybe I should do that, but like you said, like there are other ways to swing it and make it work from a financial standpoint. So we'll give it a shot and see how it goes.
And I mean, I think too, like grad school, I have a friend that similar to me, like went to the master's. He's very research oriented, and then afterwards he went to work for a startup. And unfortunately, like that didn't work out. But it was like very like research oriented, kind of startup, like biotech almost. And
Hmm.
that, yeah, but now he's an athletic trainer, and because he has that master's, he's kind of got that boost,
Oh
and
yeah.
some got that street cred when you walk up to a 40, 50-year-old soccer mom that
Hmm.
lives in DK of Texas, like a nice suburb outside of Austin. All of a sudden you kind of got that. You're not just that kid that's a personal trainer. Now you're that guy that's got his master's and he's got all this knowledge. And a lot of times when you stack up certifications, that can do a similar thing. If you've got all these abbreviations at the end of your name,
Hmm.
like CS and stuff like that, that kind of gives you that, that additional like rapport. And so sometimes you don't need to do that, but sometimes you don't need to go to grad school, but sometimes that master's can be that bigger jump. Maybe you've exhausted some of the other things and you're kind of,
Yeah.
plateauing as far as like what you can do with that. Maybe a master's opens up an avenue that you want to go into. Um,
Hmm.
but it's not always necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. As I was discussing that with Danny, like it may not be necessary for you to take that next step and continue your education, but it can only help. And especially on the networking side, it can only be a bolster to whatever you choose to do later on. So,
And sometimes too, it's not even the master's in exercise science that you get. Maybe it's the associate's degree in business that you get.
hmm,
And now all of a sudden, when you open up your gym, you know what you're doing, and you
yeah.
can run an effective business. I think sometimes that can be something that people understate when they're looking at going into personal training and such as how do I build a business, not just like how do I build my knowledge base and get more clients and stuff like that, but like if you want it to be your livelihood, how do you build
Mhm.
that?
Oh yeah, it's definitely equally, if not
You,
even more important.
you got to keep your mind open to like all the different opportunities. And then too, like when I was in grad school, um, I was lucky enough to be like a TA, like a graduate TA. And the way that University of Texas does it is that I didn't have to pay out of state tuition, and then they reduced my tuition even further. So like every semester, I was only paying about $800 in tuition, and then on top of that, I was getting paid to teach. Like I was in the like College of Education, but because of my bio background, I taught in like biological sciences. I taught the physiology lab and like the College of Arts and Sciences or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and they paid better than the kinesiology did. So like I was making like you know definitely enough to get by, pay my rent, pay for me to go out every once in a while, and pay for me to eat probably more takeout than what I should have eaten. But that's like the grad diet right there. Is especially in Texas, if you're not eating takeout tacos like 7 days a week when you're trying to cram some stuff, then you're not a real grad student.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's some great points there too.
from that side of things is I didn't have to take on any debt
Yeah.
uh, to get my grad degree. And there's usually those avenues.
Hmm.
I had buddies that would teach like racquetball, where they would teach like a strength and conditioning class,
Yeah.
or two guys that now are strength and conditioning coaches for basketball teams. They were a grad assistant on that team for that sport. So depending on like what you want to go into, there's different options. But
Hmm.
it's it's not something I'm just going to go out and say, hey, like you need to get a master's degree. It's like, hey, if it's like the right decision for you and it makes financial sense for you to do it too. I mean, I wouldn't say go to school for 2 years and then rack up an extra 35K in debt.
Right.
There's kind of get around that in some regards.
Oh, most definitely. Man, you're over here dropping knowledge on them, Robbie. But
Like, yeah.
as we're going on, one thing I want to ask, what do you think is like the next goal for you? I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about what you're doing on the career side, but like training wise or like on a fitness setting, what do you think's next?
So recovering from this
Yeah.
hernia, I'm just now getting back into the gym. I've been back in the gym for probably 2 or 3 weeks now, which
Hmm.
is I'm very deconditioned at this point. I was able to at least bench a decent amount during quarantine.
Yeah.
Uh, Crowbar got this whole, we called it the Iron Refuge, was the garage gym of stuff that we.
Oh, I saw the pictures. Yep.
Yeah, so I was still able to get some benching in. I think that was one of my weaker things in powerlifting. So
Hmm.
probably be the easiest thing to do while I can't really do much squat and deadlift.
Yeah.
But yesterday I did go out and get a DEXA scan from a local business, and I'm actually going to go to OSU and get another one because when I was looking at it, the DEXA scan said that I had 23.5% body fat, which
Hmm.
that's like poo-pooing DEXAs in general or saying that I don't need to lose some fat, but I definitely don't have 23.5% body
Yeah.
fat. So I think there might have been something wrong with the calibration in the system. We'll see, but I'm gonna go to OSU and get another one and see. So I think right now it's kind of a body comp goal.
Okay.
As I'm getting back into the gym, I want to be obviously regaining that strength that I was losing. Um, any type of heavy lifts, squats with a belt, stuff like that is probably still about 9 months to a year out for me.
Oh man. Okay.
My biggest thing physical activity wise right now is making sure that I'm physically good to go snowboarding this winter.
Yeah.
I'm very excited. I'm glad that I was able to get my procedure done when it was, because a lot of summer events and sand volleyball and stuff like that was all canceled for most of the summer. So it was
Right.
a good summer to be stuck on the couch, not going to the gym because the gym was open anyways.
Yeah.
But I would say one of my biggest things right now is maybe a little bit more aesthetic. Dropping my body fat percentage down to like the low teens would be nice.
Hmm.
I'm probably realistically, I'm probably in the high teens, like 18%,
Yeah.
roughly somewhere around there. It's hard to tell.
Hmm.
And I think moving forward, definitely going to be incorporating some more yoga. My brother and I have talked for years about doing a triathlon together,
Okay.
like an
Nice.
Olympic triathlon. Nothing
Yeah.
like man or half Ironman. That's insanity, but that might be in the cards. So it's kind of finding that new challenge. Right now, I'm sitting back a little bit and still kind of seeing what I can do. I just got cleared for general physical activity this
Hmm.
Tuesday. My like the head PT reassessed me and said everything's good, and he said start doing maybe some kettlebell single leg RDLs and stuff like that. So adding in a little bit, but the heavy weightlifting is a long ways away. I'd like
Yeah.
to get back up to that 500-pound deadlift. I had a goal initially this year of benching 315 before I turned 28. So I've got about 10 months for that. But
Hmm.
based on how deconditioned I am, and then like the shoulder injury that I've had for a decade now, got worse as I was just sitting around. I thought in general that kind of taking some time off might make it better, but just essentially kind of like weakened it. And then sitting at a desk all day, you just kind of get this, you're just
Yeah.
your shoulders all day.
Yeah.
So it's getting everything back and then working out all the kinks again so I can actually bench well.
Right.
Because I'm embarrassed to even say what I'm benching right now.
Hey,
But,
hey, we won't put you on the spot like that. But
so,
yeah, I think it's still good that you're striving for something. Sorry, go ahead.
so I was just going to say that's kind of my goals right now. I'm still waiting for a little bit to identify that next big challenge.
I got you.
Overall, I kind of have an in between goal of just getting back in the gym, restoring some of my strength. And then while I'm doing that, focusing a little bit more on nutrition and
Hmm.
exercises were always my biggest issue with dropping weight. So I'd like to, if I get down to another 10 pounds or so, I think that would be interesting to see. Aside from the one day that I weighed, 190, 197 when I was cutting for that powerlifting meet,
Hmm.
I think it would be interesting to get back down to that weight, but actually
Yeah.
like a sustainable.
Right, right.
So,
Yeah, I remember Crowbar told me he did a water cut. I was like, dang, water cut on the first meet, you're pushing him.
so I was sitting around like 206, 207 the week before, and I was starting to get worried because I didn't think I was going to make my weight class, which wouldn't have been a huge deal. I just would have been competing in the next one up. But the guys in that next one up were like really big, and the one that I was shooting for, there was only one other guy, and he was like 19 years old. The man's like solid power lifter, but I was like within shooting distance of being able to beat him. So
Mhm.
that whole week, I've kind of done a little bit of research just on a generic cut. So I cut down my food a lot. I was eating just like my lunch was basically just a 6-inch Subway sub, which
Mhm.
sounds like a amount of food, but for me that's cutting back a lot.
Oh yeah.
And then I was just chugging water for most of that week, and then about 48 hours out went to just normal water intake, and then 24 hours out I just went into a straight dry fast, no water, like no food for 24 hours before weigh-in, which was an interesting experience because it kind of changes your relationship with food. You
Yeah.
just experience more hunger, like the hunger you get when you're leaving work or it's like 5 o'clock and you
Mhm.
haven't eaten since noon. You're like, oh man, like I'm kind of hungry, and then you get like really hungry by 7 or 8 o'clock. There's
Yeah.
this window where like if you just push past that like an hour or two, all of a sudden that like strong hunger feeling starts to go away into this just kind of dull tiredness, but it's different because you
Yeah.
realize if you push past that, oh, I want to snack on something. All of a sudden, you realize that oh, I don't need food. I'm fine. I can actually survive for weeks without food. You
Hmm.
know? So that was an interesting experience.
Oh yeah.
I don't think the water cut went quite as well as it is supposed to.
Hmm.
You're supposed to somehow trick your body into continuing to get rid of water even after you've stopped drinking water. But
Hmm.
basically, when I stopped drinking water, I stopped going to the bathroom. Like I was going to the bathroom like 8 times a day, and the days leading up to that, and all of a sudden I stopped drinking water, and it was just nothing. So
Wow.
I I don't know if it worked out exactly how it was
Yeah.
supposed to, but it was interesting. And then I just hit the sauna the next morning.
Hmm.
To me, I was well under. Hit the stairmaster. I did the whole garbage bag under your sweatshirt. Hit the stairmaster thing that like wrestlers do.
Yeah. Yeah.
It works.
Yeah. Shoot, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and just like that. That was a good discussion and some great knowledge as well. If you want, do you want to drop like where the people can follow up with you and follow on for the future things, or if you don't want to, that's fine too.
Yeah, my Instagram game's not that great, but if you really want to follow me, it's just at Robbie Gregg 93. Um, I pretty much only post when I travel, but
Yeah.
I'll definitely put this in my story when you post this one.
Hey, well, I appreciate that. And once you get back to that 500-pound deadlift or like 510, 520, you got to put that up there too, because it'll be cool to see the journey back.
Well, yeah, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for checking out episode 17 of the Trainer Scoop. I'm actually going to do a little plugging on this outro. If you wouldn't mind heading over to that iTunes store, which is, something I don't ask for a lot, but we've got a couple great reviews and I'm looking to add to that a little bit. So if you have some time, maybe drop me 5 stars, maybe say how much you liked Robbie in this interview and how much you appreciated his discussion and
Yeah.
just advice in general. And maybe if you're on YouTube and you see this really cool Brothers Pikachu tank and you say, hey, I really like that Brothers Pikachu tank. I'd even like that too. So thank you all so much for listening, for real though. And we'll catch you in the next one.
Good to see you, bud.